Hi, welcome to Playback, the EBSN podcast. The EBSN has just finished a 3-day conference, virtual conference, EBSN 2021, which was pretty successful, I think, and we're quite pleased with the way things turned out. So we also are going to be sharing some of the recordings of that conference, if not all of the recordings of that conference that we made using Zoom. We'll begin with the opening address by myself, Benjamin J. Heel, Estíbaliz, Encarnación-Pinedo, and Chad Weidner. We all co-organized the conference. And so a short welcome announcement with some of the background behind the conference and other things that the network has been up to. And then you will hear a recording and see a recording of panel 1, which is titled Spiraling Back to the Beat's Spiritual Roots, Spiraling Forth to the Beat's Neo-Shamanic Potential. This is a panel that was organized and chaired by Franca Bellarsi, with Chad Weidner acting as a moderator. And I will, without further ado, I will cut to that. So look out for the other podcasts that are coming up, and also check out the other content that's going to be coming on the website, ebsn.eu. Okay, enjoy.
Okay, well, welcome to the 9th annual conference of the EBSN, which is the first ever virtual conference of the EBSN. I'm not going to say very much at all, but before I hand over to them, I wanted to say a special thanks to the organising team, because obviously this has been a unique challenge to come up with a conference design which looks fantastic on paper and also hopefully will work technically. So I wanted to say a big thank you to Esty, Ben, Chad and Raven. It's terrific you managed to sort of get this together, and it's proof that the EBSN goes on even when circumstances make it very difficult to do what we've done, I think, so well in the past, which is to have physical meetings where people share a space and get to know each other and get to present in a really sort of informal and creative as well as critical way, which I think has been the great achievement of the EBSN over the last decade. So virtually is not quite the same, but it will have its advantages as well as disadvantages. So without further ado, I would like to hand over to the organisers and say a big thank you and welcome to everyone.
That's great. Thanks, Oliver. Thank you. Chad, you wanna go first, or shall I start? Okay.
Sure, that's fine. Hey, I just want to say, I want to welcome everyone. It's been almost 2 years that we've been going through this pandemic. Our last meeting was in Cyprus. It seems like a long time ago. And one of the cool things about the EBSN is that it's a really global kind of association. It's not only academic, but there are other people who join as well. So for me, professionally, it's really, really interesting, and I enjoy it. And I have for some time. I remember 10 years ago, Oliver, Paulina, and I were already organizing the first conference in Middleburg. That was 10 years ago. And I can remember at that first conference, I was talking to Oliver about my concerns about the future of the EBSN and will we survive? Will there be another conference? And here we are 10 years later, and we have been all over the place. We've had some great publications come out. There was the Comparative American Studies special issue that came out in 2013. There was a CLC issue that came out. Some other things have come out more recently. So we've also been disseminating some of the information from these conferences, which I think is important as well. COVID has slowed us down. It wasn't possible to meet last year. That was a bummer, but we've responded, I think, in a way that shows that we're flexible and that we try to do different things. So this is not meant to be a replacement for the in-person conference. Let's just be honest, there are limitations to what we can do with this, but there will be a conversation, and that's really interesting. And so Zoom really kind of offers us an alternative for this year, and maybe a possible alternative in the future as well. We'll talk more about that later. I want to just quickly thank Ben, Estíbaliz, and Raven and Paul. They've been amazing over the last year. Couldn't have done it without them. So much work behind the scenes. And I just want to I just want to say I hope everyone's really excited about the next few days as much as I am. And so I welcome you. That's all I've got to say, Ben.
Yeah, well, that's pretty much everything, really, Chad. I mean, yeah, it's been weird. I can't believe it's 2019 that we were back in Cyprus, and then like it just feels like we've fallen into a weird time trap, and we've kind of missed out on things. And I don't want to dwell on the negatives that have come before and try to focus on this as being a positive thing. But we really did think, well, okay, so we can't have a conference because of COVID. So, but wait, we can have a conference. We can use Zoom. We can do what everybody else has been forced to do over the last couple of years, and we can see what we can do with that in the context of the EBSN. And we should keep the EBSN and keep the beat studies conversation going, because it's so important, really, what we do. So I want to thank, obviously, Raven, Chad, and Paul, and everybody on the board as well for helping us and for keeping us afloat and going, because there was a real concern that we were maybe we were going to go under with all this at one stage. So it's amazing that we're actually really in quite good health at the moment. The EBSN is in a position where we can think ahead and think about the future. We have conferences in the future, in fact, thanks to Thomas and to Estíbaliz and to Oliver, of course. We've got 3 conferences in the pipeline, and with technology like this, we can also think about doing other things on the side as well, which helps perhaps to open up participation to people who aren't able to travel. And of course, travel is a big problem for people at the moment, and will be for the next few years as well, I think. And of course, with the environmental considerations, we need to think about that as well. So, I mean, I don't want to kind of go on too long and think a bit about this more broadly, but really, we in the humanities and we in beat studies more specifically, we're kind of up against it. I feel like we're under threat and under attack. And this is something that the MLA are pushing quite strongly. But we should take pride in what we do with beat studies. We should really, let people know and be more sort of less self-effacing about our beat credentials. Because I often feel like beat studies is subsumed under like banners like 20th century literature, or tacked onto late modernism or something. And I feel like beat studies is a place of its own, and it should do. And as a network, we do continue to grow. There's no denying that. So I think we've got so many sort of positive traits and positive things. You look at the range of papers that we've had. We wanted this discussion to be about beat studies where we are now, and the discussion about where we go from here in the future. And you look at the range of critical approaches, material approaches to beat studies, beat literature, and moving beyond the beats, the main beats. And there's so much for us to do. There's so much sort of healthy debate, dialogue, and research going on that we should really kind of be proud of it and sing our own praises a little bit about this, rather than sort of lacking in confidence and always thinking, oh, we need to be part of something bigger or something more important than our little beat studies niche. I think we are quite, we're quite good. But with all that aside, I should probably give you some housekeeping about the conference. Come back to the conference. If anyone has any issues with the technology, if anyone is worried about their presentation and anything to do with Zoom, there's a bit of a learning curve for everybody, but we're going to keep it as relaxed and chilled out and beat as we possibly can on this. I know I'm actually giving a paper at another conference during this conference, and they're being ultra strict about time limits and about making sure that we all did a test and we all know what we're doing. And I don't want to be like so kind of ridiculously formal as that. So we'll kind of work with the system and be a little flexible about it, and hopefully things will work out. Now, the 2 main Zoom rooms And make sure there's a distinction between room and breakout room here, which can be confusing, but there are two main rooms throughout the whole conference that will be running daily. And there'll be a set of panels in each room running concurrently throughout the day. Now, if you feel the need to, there will also be breakout rooms running throughout the day in each of those main rooms where you can leave, have a break, have a separate discussion as well. There's also, we have the EBSN Facebook discussion group. You can kind of move beyond the Zoom, move beyond the conference and go and have discussions on there. I've also added a link to a Signal group as well. So it's like, I've put that on the website as well, a QR code and a link for that if you're into kind of messaging apps and things like that. So we can keep the conversation going there as well, if you like. And of course, there's the EBSN Twitter feed too. Whether I'm going to be able to keep track of all this is another matter, but we'll do what we can, right? We'll do what we can. So yeah, any problems, let us know. And I think it's enough of me talking. Estíbaliz, did you want to say a couple of words?
Okay, just very quickly, because I don't want to take more time. We have 3 intense days ahead of us. We have 17 panels, 45 presentations, a keynote, the book launch, plus all these breakout rooms, which I think are the best to have more conversations this is actually the point of this event we're having, to have conversation to keep us going. And that's it. I'd like to thank my co-organizers, of course, Ben, Chad, and Raven, and the board for their support. And I hope you enjoy this as much as we have enjoyed and suffered the organization. So I hope you have fun.
Okay, so what do we do now? That's the question, right? So
now we have a little break, right?
We can have a little break, but I think we've got Franca Bellarsi is chairing panel 1, spiraling back to the beat's spiritual roots, and spiraling forth to the beat's neo-shamanic potential. That will be in this room, so you can just stay logged in, stay in this main room until 3 p.m. In panel 2, which will be over in room 2, is Art and the Beat Generation. That's going to be chaired by Peggy Piccini, and Estíbaliz will be moderating that session. And yeah, so if you want to do that, at the top of the chat window, there's a link for room 2. So actually, I've just noticed that link is not going to work. So let me add a new link here. Hold on. Bear with me 1 second. Let's see if I can resolve the first issue here, right? Okay, so I'm just sharing a link to room 2 in the chat window. No. He says, There we go. Okay. If that's going to work. No, it isn't. Okay.
We can also move people manually if you want.
You can. I'm getting there. I had this problem earlier. So let's try this link. I think I just needed to press. Yeah, we go. Okay, so that should work now. So that in the chat window, so you can, if you haven't got your chat window active, you click on chat at the bottom of the screen, and you should see room 2 with a link next to it, and hopefully that link will work. Again, let me know if there's any problems with that. Okay.
So that's only for the second panel, right?
Yeah, that's for panel 2, Art and the Beat Generation. Okay, again, if you wanted to go there early, Estíbaliz will be moderating that panel. She can assign you a breakout room if you want, or you can begin the chat earlier. And she'll be making sure that the panelists are prepared and they've got their PPTs ready and organized and the audio's working and everything. Okay. Okay, so if anyone has any other questions, you can message me directly through the chat window or whatever you like. Okay. Okay. Welcome everybody, and looking forward to getting into this.
Welcome to this panel, the first panel of the conference, which is actually bringing together students from the Université Libre de Bruxelles, former MA students of mine, but students who are all at the moment developing new approaches to the beads, interesting new angles, I mean, bringing different streams of research together. And we thought indeed that it would be very good to have actually, you know, an MA panel at this virtual edition of the EBSN, since it is a shame that a lot of work done by promising MA students is being lost due to the fact that they often cannot get funding to come to conferences, due to the fact that, well, the funding agencies, I mean, you know, very sort of open to doctoral work, but when it comes to MA students, it's a shame that so much good work done by MA students is being lost. And so this is why we decided actually to bring together three very different approaches, three very different line of inquiries pursued by MA students at ULB, MA students who all graduated with summa cum laude, so their work was very well received, and I hope that it will also be well received here. Plus, I also hope that there will be interesting questions from you know, the audience, from you, so as to sort of, you know, give them further ideas, help them, you know, dig further, so help them further with, you know, their projects, because I think most of them would like to actually continue research. So, in fact, as will also become obvious to you, these are very different papers. We will have a first paper by Sarah Biratate, who is looking at new ways of fusing beat studies and romantic studies. She will give a paper devoted to Diane de Prima and Wordsworth's influence on the Prima. The second speaker, Anikó is actually a speaker who will present her comparative work on the beads and Hungarian literature, showing us indeed how important it is to continue the comparative studies work that has existed for some time, of course, for the beads, but there are still a number of cultural areas, including, of course, Hungary, which, due to the language barrier, have not actually, you know, been showcased enough. And indeed, Anikó is Hungarian by birth, so she masters the language perfectly, and she is in a unique position to bring basically, you know, to greater visibility Hungarian writers and their conversations with the beats. And then we will have, you know, a third paper by Jérémy Wastiaux, who has been looking actually at Kerouac's work from the perspective of ecopoetics, experimental ecopoetics. So I would like, first of all, to, you know, have the papers in succession so that you can hear by yourselves, I mean, you know, how diverse the approaches are, but also how curiously they tie in together in a sort of, you know, variegated mosaic. then I will actually perhaps say a few concluding words, after the presentation, before then opening the floor to questions, before allowing you to interact with the presenters. So I propose to start, if that's okay with you. Chad, is everything all right? Are you okay with, yeah, all right, I see thumbs up. So without further ado, let me give you the word to Sarah Biratate. Sarah has just finished her MA in modern languages at ULB and embarked upon a new MA, this time in translation and interpretation studies. Besides working on the beats, she also writes. She is completing her first novel soon, I hope. So she is also a creative writer. And if there is anything that she would like to add about herself, she will do so. But I propose now to open her mic, Chad and Sarah. So if you could activate the sound. And Sarah, if you could also share your PowerPoint with the audience, because I've got it. But in case that's just in case there's a problem, ideally it is from your workstation, that things should be shared with the audience, fellow beats.
I can talk you through it, Sarah, if you need me to.
I think I found it.
So you have to have your PowerPoint open. Yeah, there you go. It'll work. Oh, cool.
Okay. Perfect. So good afternoon, everybody. I will be presenting the results of my thesis, a Wordsworthian reading of the Prima Interfusion. One moment. You can see the slides changing, right? Because it glitched for a second.
Yeah, it's good.
Okay, perfect. So at first glance, Wordsworth and the Prima may seem to be diametrically opposed. However, I suggest that they both share the same worldview. This worldview is centered around the idea that the world is suffering. The world is suffering because we are unable to grasp the holistic of our universe. The role of the poet, through a hermeneutic use of poetry, is to convey this unified understanding of the universe to their reader. They fulfill this role through what I explained as 4 different figures. The prophet embodies the concept that the poet is endowed with the duty to enlighten others. It is something that must be done. The figure of the comes to this concept of duty and conveys the idea that the poet is motivated by a deep and altruistic love for others. The figure of the shaman bridges different realms, most specifically the realm of the living and the dead. It also brings forth the concept of the wounded healer, as coined by Bookhoven, and the idea that poets are not outsiders, but they themselves also suffer and must overcome the suffering, and in so doing are able to communicate how to overcome suffering to their reader. Finally, the figure of the angel embodies the idea of co-creator of the universe. I based my analysis by following 2 different directions. On the one hand, I detected Wordsworthian influence in the Prima's work, and on the other, I engaged in an anachronic reading of Wordsworth's work, to which I have applied different terminologies, and most specifically here, Buddhist and Hermetic terminologies. Not because I believe that Wordsworth had access to those works or that he was influenced by them, but because I believe that these terminologies can help clarify his theories. I focused my thesis on autobiographical writings, namely the preludes, loba, and pieces of a song. As I said, their worldview is centered around the idea that the world is suffering. I would like to elaborate on this concept by using a definition by James Engel, who believes that what we understand as a world or universe can be best described by using two different terms. On the one hand, the realm of the earth, which is the realm of the temporary, the realm of human achievements of decay. And on the other hand, the realm of nature, that is the realm of the infinite and the imagination. We suffer because we are unable to understand that those two realms are intricately woven into one another. Therefore, the role of the poet is to communicate this holistic conception to their readers. To explore this holistic conception, I must quickly define the imagination as it is used in Wordsworth and Prima's poetry. The imagination is an inherent skill that we all possess. However, poets are particularly skilled at wielding this ability. And because of that, they are endowed with the duty to enlighten others. This is where the figures of the prophet and the bodhisattva come to play. The imagination, as I said, is the realm of the eternity, of eternity and of the infinite. And what I mean by that is that in Wordsworth and Prima's poetry, the imagination is both a means to attain and the representation of enlightenment. The imagination is what fuels and shapes poetry, but it is also the realm of the infinite and eternity, and a realm in which every element is linked to the other. Because of that, as I said, it is both a means to attain and the representation of enlightenment. And both Wordsworth and Prima, interestingly, connect this concept of the imagination to the image of light, which I will explain further as the light of meditation, enlightenment, and therefore enlightenment itself. I have focused on autobiographical writings because it enabled me to establish two different concepts of the notion of memory. On the one hand, there is the idea that the poet recollects and collects different lived experiences, past lived experiences within a volume, and in so doing is able to shape a unified image of themselves and reach inner unification. However, the second concept of memory is intricately linked to imagination, as I have just defined it. What I mean by that is that the imagination for Wordsworth and Prima is not only inherent to every human being, but is also the realm from which we originate. It is our genesis. Following this logic, through their poetry, Wordsworth and Prima bring forth a memory of a realm from which we originate and to which we long to go back. Strikingly, Wordsworth and Prima represent this idea through similar metaphors, both centered around the image of the sea. So they present human beings as being stranded on shore and longing to return to the sea, which is the realm of eternity and the imagination, a realm in which every element is connected to every other element. So they represent a worldview that is best described through Hermetic terms. This is why I have applied a Hermetic terminology to Wordsworth. Indeed, Hermeticism postulates not only that each element, that every element are intricately linked, but also that different realms and different planes of existence are also linked to one another. And here, as you can see, most importantly, the realm of the dead and the living, which brings forth the figure of the shaman. You can see that both Wordsworth and Prima believe that the root of our suffering is our inability to acknowledge that life and death are intricately connected to one another. The shaman, as a bridge between those two realms, not only is able to access the realm of the dead, the realm of the spirit, but most importantly is able to go back to the realm of the living and to communicate their experiences to their readers here, in the case of poets. As I said, the shaman also bring forth the concept of the wounded healer and the idea that poets are not ostracized from society, they are part of it, like shamans are. They also suffer from the same struggles that we all face, and they have managed to overcome it, and therefore are willing to communicate a way to enlightenment. To do so, both Wordsworth and Prima use poetry as a hermeneutic device. I explain this through the notion of musicality that I in turn explain with a triple identification that you can see here on screen. Poetry is life, is music. What I mean by that is that for both Wordsworth and Prima, poetry is a life force. They both represent it and connect it to breath. It is corporeal. In turn, poetry, life, is music. What is meant by that is that it's a hermeneutic conception of poetry, according to which the words cannot be separated from their meaning. For example, like magic words, they not only convey, but they also act. And paraphrasing it would mean losing its act of universe. Because of that, because poetry cannot be separated, on the one side words and on the other meaning and action, poetry is enlightenment itself. It is light. So through breath and light, what you can see is that sound and light are connected. And it's this connection between sound and light that connects both Wordsworth as much as Prima to the mantric tradition. I have included here from La Canada, who explains the concept of mantra. And it is explained as both a mean to and a representation of enlightenment and the infinite within us, which, per my definition, is the imagination. Therefore, both Wordsworth and Prima use their poetry as a mantra, as a means to and representation of enlightenment, and as light itself. Instead, imagination is inherent to everybody. However, it is also influenced by our environment, and most specifically nature. I explain in my thesis through a hermetic understanding that nature can communicate with human beings through earthly elements, for example, rocks or water or trees. And in so doing, because nature conveys a message, nature can act as a guide. In my thesis, I divide this guiding role in two different categories, moral on the one hand and creative on the other, but I focus here only on creativity because of time constraints. And you can see here an excerpt from the prelude in which Wordsworth shares a moment during which his mind was influenced and influenced by nature. It was played like an instrument by the hands of nature. Therefore, the poets not only represent nature in their poetry, they also, this poetic product is also shaped by nature itself. However, this influence goes both ways. The poet is also able to influence nature, and in so doing takes on a role of co-creator of the universe. This idea might seem contradictory because of the definition of nature that I've given earlier in this presentation, meaning a definition according to which nature is the realm of the infinite. Therefore, it's hard to understand how one can add to the infinite, shape the infinite, or add elements to a universe that is constantly whole. Well, the quote that I've included here by 3 initiates answers this very question. They answered by postulating the existence of a different realm, which is the mental realm. And it's a realm of the infinite within us, which, again, following the definition that I've crafted throughout this presentation, is the imagination. The imagination is the infinite realm on which poets are able to act. It is the universe that poets are able to create and shape. And in so doing, poets take on the role of angels, of co-creators of the universe. To conclude, I have established that Wordsworth and the Prima share a worldview according to which, centered around the idea that the world is suffering because we are unable to grasp the holistic nature of the universe. And poets must communicate a unified understanding of nature, of the universe, by using poetry as a hermeneutic device. And in so doing, they fulfill a role that can be explained through 4 different figures: the prophet, the bodhisattva, the shaman, and the angel. Thank you for your attention.
Okay, and Chad, can you reactivate my camera very quickly? Thank you. Okay, well, thank you very much, Sarah. For this, I mean, you know, very dense presentation, you know, reflecting also the complexity of the thesis that you wrote, because before giving the floor to Anikó, I just want to, you know, say that in fact, we noticed, Sarah and I, that some work, not enough, some work had been done basically, you know, comparing De Prima with Keats, but that there was nothing actually, you know, between dealing, you know, with the parallels between De Prima and Wordsworth, whereas she actually, vindicated affiliation with the whole Romantic tradition. And just, you know, to round off your presentation, Sarah, what is very interesting is that you propose actually categories that are not normally the categories that people think about, either to approach De Prima or to approach Wordsworth. And in fact, you show the need actually to sort of, you know, be a little bit more creative, to develop greater lateral thinking in actually coining categories that bring, I mean, you know, apparently very divergent universes together. And if you want to understand how basically Romanticism helps to understand De Prima, you need new categories. And likewise, your work is also very interesting because it forces, or invites rather, Romantic studies specialists to think about classics, you know, iconic works in very different terms. So why do we need the B generation to understand Romanticism? That is also one of the questions that your work sought to address. Sure, there will be many questions, and let me repeat that here Sarah was only able in a nutshell to present, you know, the main lines of her work, which was, I mean, very, very complex from a philosophical point of view. I would like to add that. Okay, now in a minute, we will have the pleasure of listening to Anikó. So how can I present Anikó? Well, actually, a few days ago, up to a few days ago, I would have said Anikó is was born in Hungary, has been living in Belgium for many, many years now, and actually has also been working for a Hungarian cultural agency and press agency. So she's been working basically also not just in the beat field, at establishing, conversations between different countries that don't always talk to one another, don't always, understand one another. So also in real life, she's been a go-between between Belgium and Hungary and their respective cultures. But I have to make a slight amendment to her biography because I can't resist telling you this. Well, Anikó is currently looking for funding for a doctoral project, and she is the first of my students who is so enthusiastic about what she's doing, and also possesses this brazen, bold, beat mind, that we all admire, that she went as far as writing to the King of Belgium to, ask him to intercede basically in the education system, to intercede with the education system here to allow her to get some funding. And believe it or not, 2 days before the conference, the palace replied. So this is a first that I felt I absolutely had to share with you. So Anikó, despite, the how can I put it? I mean, I don't know, I've never had this sort of aura of the royal palace attached to any of my students before, but anyhow, I leave the floor to you now. So you have 15 minutes to explain to us some of the very interesting links that you excavated for the first time, and also some of the very interesting Hungarian texts that you translated into English for the first time, so making them available also to a wider community. On you go, Anikó.
You'll need to unmute.
Okay, good afternoon. Thank you, Dr. Bellarsi, for this amazing introduction. I thank you for the opportunity to be able to present my work here today. My thesis is about the influence of the Beat generation, more precisely of Corso and Ginsberg, on the works of the Hungarian poet Ferenc Juhász. Juhász is a Nobel Prize nominated poet from Hungary. He was an extremely prolific author, which is the reason why this thesis could only cover a limited number of his works. I chose the ones from the period dating between 1960 and 1970 because that was the time when the Beat author's influence was the most prominent. It is important to state that Juhász's poetry already possessed these characteristics that we associate, at least the people in this conference, with Beat literature, such as structural parallelism, juxtapositions, noun phrases, and free verse. I would also like to say that parallel structures are also an inherent characteristic of Hungarian, which, as you know, is not an Indo-European language. So in a way, the Hungarian language is adapted to these structures, which which makes it an interesting study of reception. Juhász was half Hungarian and half Swabian, and he had access to literature in Hungarian and German. His vision was influenced by mysticism, including of figures like Swedenborg and later by socialism. Just as the beats, he believed in the transformative power of poetry. As you can see on the screen, he defined poetry as action and considered that poetry's role is not the imitation of the universe, but the creation of a universe of equal value. If you read the second quotation carefully, you can see echoes of Kerouac's Essentials of Spontaneous Prose, although in this case it seems like a result of confluence rather than direct influence. The diamond structure suggests that the similarity is due to confluence because of their knowledge of Buddhism. Juhász also participated in a clinical LSD trial in 1957, which was 2 years before Ginsberg did the same. Although the drug experiment remained an isolated incident in Juhász's life, which he referred to only in a single poem in prose that he published a decade after the experiment. It is important to keep in mind that in the context of Hungary in the 60s, Juhász didn't have the possibility to publish poems like Lysergic Acid or Mescaline. However, these drug-induced, some of the visions that he describes in his poetry resemble drug-induced hallucinations, some of which we will see later. The year before Juhász died, in 2015, he gave an interview about his affinity to the beats, in which he expressed the ways in which his work is connected to Corso's and Ginsberg's. However, this hasn't been explored by scholars yet, which is why I chose Juhász as the focus of my thesis, because of the interesting biographical parallels, their vision of poetry, and because of his intellectual integrity to acknowledge the beat's influence on his works. In 1967, Juhász asked Corso's permission to write a paraphrase of his bomb to modify the poem, and Corso granted him the permission, which was, as we know, an unusual gesture. Juhász preserved the poem's physical shape, but he made it even longer and denser than the original. For instance, he reinforced the theme of the poem's cycle of creation and destruction with additional references to Hungarian folklore and creatures from his personal mythology. For instance, the griffin bird is known to provide the passage from one level of reality to another in Hungarian folk tales. In certain tales, the griffin bird literally tears the hero into pieces before reconstructing him again in the end, which is a very fitting metaphor for the bomb. The Milky Way in the final line of bomb is also a frequently used symbol by Juhász, which has multiple meanings in the poem's context. Obviously, it works as a phallic symbol. It refers to artistic creation and also to Juhász's kinship, the kinship that he felt to Corso. In Hungarian folklore, the Milky Way is considered to be the trace left by the army that came to the rescue of the Hungarians of Transylvania, of our long lost brothers who came to rescue us. So the image works on multiple levels. Furthermore, Juhász added references to the other members of the beat group. For instance, to Ginsberg's How in line 57, and to Burroughs in line 94-95, adding Centipede and Millipede. Interestingly, the Centipede also represented a monster in Juhász's universe ever since as early as in the epic that he published in 1952 called My Father. But here it's quite obviously a reference to Burroughs. Some of the other modifications or lengthening of lines are due to Juhász's tendency to replacing qualifiers by detailed illustrations inspired by natural sciences. Like instead of saying boom, he says fire rot wither, referring to the chemical process, or moral and physical anxiously participate, replaced by shaking inside one another. We could say that Juhász's bomb is like a synthesis of his and the beat author's universes. And it's really worth reading and exploring what he added to this already long and epic poem. Now I'm going to talk about a second poem by Juhász, which is very much of a beat poem, related to Ginsberg's Howl and to a lesser extent to Korszó's Coney Island. The poem alludes to the Hungarian uprising in 1965, and just as Ginsberg's Howl, it conveys the redemption of the material world by the poet's vision. It describes the nighttime visions of the poet standing on a famous square of Budapest called Octagon. One of the shared images between Howl, Coney Island, and Thursday, Day of Superstition, are the neon lights, which have a double meaning in both Howl and the Juhász poem. On the one hand, they refer to consumerism, but at the same time to the light of the mind. And it seems likely that Juhász borrowed this image from Ginsberg. On this slide, you can see an excerpt from Korszó's Coney Island. If you read the two texts next to one another, you see that nightlife is symbolized by the Ferris wheel, the nighttime activity on Coney Island or the Octagon Square or Budapest are symbolized by this turning Ferris wheel. Talking about the criticism of consumerism, I would also like to make a point about the fusion of nature and the industrial in Juhász's and Ginsberg's respective works. On the left, you can see an excerpt from Juhász's original poem about the atomic bomb called The Images of the Night. And on the right, from Ginsberg's Sunflower Sutra. For instance, the rubber breasts and the milky breasts of cars are another pair of images that appear in both Juhász and Ginsberg. Lastly, I would like to show you an excerpt from Juhász's poem, The Abandoned House, which contains a synecdoche catalog that seems to be inspired by Ginsberg's Kaddish. As you can see, both excerpts enumerate life's hardships linked to the motive of the eye. the Toad King who steers Juhász is talking about is a creature that symbolizes that in Juhász's personal mythology or personal universe. And the Juhászic serpt refers to the poet's deceased father. So both the Ginsberg and the Juhász poems talk about the poet's dead parents' suffering, which is an interesting parallel. Unfortunately, I couldn't include this in today's presentation, but Juhász also wrote an epic dedicated to his mother. It was written while his mother was still alive. This is the epic that contains the abandoned house. And another important parallel with Ginsberg's works is the subversive use of litany forms in the poems of the volume. One of Juhász's scholars, Mr. Pomogács, stated that Juhász is a poet that incorporated the different layers of culture into his poetry. And after a close reading of their works from the given period, I think that Corso's and Ginsberg's verse also consists one of these layers that Juhász incorporated into his universe through paraphrases and the incorporation of the motifs that I showed you. However, it is important to state that the influence of the beats and especially Corso's verse remained a lasting influence. The excerpt that you see is from a tribute that Juhász wrote to Corso in 2008, which means that the study of beat influence on Juhász's later works still holds the potential for further studies. Thank you for listening to my presentation, and I'll be glad to answer your questions.
Mm-hmm. Okay, well, thank you, Anikó. And again, what is quite important in the kind of work that you've done is to highlight again the importance of close reading, number one. So, because I mean, the close reading sometimes, I mean, tends to be forgotten about, you know, amongst larger theorization. And again, you have really done a sort of, you know, Benedictine monk's work, comparing, you know, line by line, you know, the poems. And let me repeat also that what is very important in your case is the making available of, you know, Hungarian texts that remain untranslated. So beat influenced material that is simply not known about due to the language barrier. And again, I remember the first time that I saw this extensive interview by Juhász, you know, in its English version, I thought, okay, you know, I mean, it was indeed like a bomb going off in my head, I have to say that. And we are now coming to our last speaker, Jérémy Wastiaux. And Jérémy Wastiaux, actually, his work, well, it's interesting that, you know, Jérémy closes the panel because in fact, Jérémy both coined new categories, through which to look at Kerouac's verse, but also there was a lot of close reading involved. So we have actually, you know, the strengths of Sarah's thesis and Anikó's thesis sort of, you know, brought together. And also what is quite interesting in the case of Jérémy, Jérémy used dissipative structures, as he will explain to you in a minute, to approach works by Kerouac that are not looked at in terms of eco-criticism and eco-poetics. And again, we read dissipative structures here and there in beat literature. For instance, Anne Waldman has a postface, a postscriptum to Fast-Speaking Woman, in which she uses that. But of course, these are complex concepts that you know, very few people explore to the full and can wield with ease. And Jérémy, as you will show us in a moment, you did that. Let me also add that it is perhaps appropriate that someone worked on dissipative structures and beat poetry at ULB, since you will explain that Ilya Prigogine is actually at the center of this kind of theory. And Ilya Prigogine was indeed a Nobel Prize who you know, worked at ULB and taught at ULB for many years. So indeed, you have a reading grid that is also very much a reading grid that was coined within our walls. But without further ado, except to say that you are currently working as a secondary school teacher, so you had to negotiate your release this afternoon from the headmistress to join us, but you've done so. Again, you completed your MA in English and German at ULB. So let me deactivate my mic and my video, and Jérémy, you have the floor.
Okay, so I don't know what time it is for everyone, but it's the afternoon here, so it's going to be good afternoon, everyone. As Dr. Bellarsi just said, I'm a teacher, so I'm used to captive audiences, and even though there's a small red button on the bottom corner, it does feel like you're all trapped in here with me. So please be patient. I will do my best to keep you entertained. So first of all, it is a real pleasure to follow the illuminating presentation by Anikó and also Sarah. So I will try to do my best and try and emulate them. So now the author I'm going to talk about actually is far from being an outsider when it comes to the beat generation, obviously. So we're going to talk about Jack Kerouac. Let me do that. Okay, so I'm not seeing any faces, but I hope it's working. So we're going to talk about Jack Kerouac, and actually one of the first concerns I had when I set out to write my master's thesis about Kerouac 2 years ago now was that I was going to have to find something to say about him that hadn't already been broached in the hundreds and if not thousands of essays and monographs that had already appeared previously. Luckily, my supervisor, Dr. Bellarsi, was far less clueless about that than I was, and we quickly decided on two things. First, that I would do my research about both Visions of Cody, which is a 600-page experimental novel written in 1951, and Mexico City Blues, which is a book-length poem made of 244 choruses or smaller poems, let's say. So that's the first thing. And the second thing, as was already alluded to, is the fact that I would assume in my thesis an eco-critical perspective, more precisely known as ecopoetics. So what is ecopoetics? So on the picture, you have poetry that explores ecological concerns, and the term can take Lots of
Jeremy,
yeah.
are you trying to share a PowerPoint?
Yes. Is it
Yes,
not
we're
working?
not seeing it. So if you open up, make sure your PowerPoint is open already,
Yeah.
and then you have to use the screen share function
Oh,
at the
yeah.
bottom.
Fair enough.
There you go.
Working
Perfect.
now.
Yep.
Oh, okay. Sorry. So you missed the first one. So we have beautiful Jack Kerouac typing on the no, listening to music. Okay. Can you see it now?
Yeah, looks great.
Okay, good. Sorry about the mishap. So on the PowerPoint, Ecopoetics, we have poetry that explores ecological concerns, and it is true that Ecopoetics does that, but some would say that this is closer to eco-criticism in general. So Ecopoetics, we could talk about it for way too long. So I'm going to define it according to its use within my own dissertation. And it would be interesting to delineate it as the conceptual crossroads between ecology, the hard sciences, so STEM fields, and literature. And more precisely, to assume an eco-poetical perspective is to consider literature as a terrain for strife, friction, probable friction. And it is also interested in the coexistence and reunification of contraries. So to assume this perspective in my research on visions of Cody and Mexico City Blues, I've had to create a reading grid that combines two strikingly distinct domains. The first is Kerouac's Essentials of Spontaneous Prose, which Anikó already mentioned, and which is the closest thing we have to any method Kerouac might have used when writing his books. In the Essentials, Kerouac provides readers with pieces of advice such as no periods but the vigorous space dash separating rhetorical breathing, or no pause to think of proper word but the infantile pileup of scatological build-up word till satisfaction is gained. So it's basically a jazz-inspired guide for spontaneous writing. So you have a couple of quotes on screen. And now the second domain I have blended into my analysis is a subfield of thermodynamics known as the study of dissipative structures. And well, in short, so tersely summarized, dissipative structures are structures that manage to spontaneously create order out of chaos, which is, if anyone is familiar with the House of Commons in the UK, there is John Bercow creating order out of chaos. So structures that manage to spontaneously create order and design out of chaos and randomness. They allow non-equilibrium states, which are the states of disorder, to cohere into ordered structures. And actually this field, so this subdomain of thermodynamics, was created to explain the possibility, so to try and explain the possibility of life in a universe which is chaotic. So how can we have something as structured and ordered as life? So within the universe. So the general objective of this eco-poetical reading grid, so blending dissipative structures and the essentials of spontaneous prose, was to look for patterns of non-duality, for apparent contradictions in a book, in a chapter, or even a single line of poetry, and to try and reconcile those contradictions as the necessary part of a larger literary project, and to show that the contradictions actually are not hindering the motion of the narrative, but actually propelling forward the narrative. So now let's take a look at Mexico City Blues. So here is so we're going to start with an excerpt of Mexico City Blues, and I'm going to show you that. But before that, a few words about the book itself. So Kerouac wrote it in the mid-50s, 1955, yes, I think, when Buddhism was most influenced on his work. So it comprises 242 choruses, which are separated by pages. But what we cannot forget is that Mexico City Blues is not a compilation of poems. It is really one large poem that happens to be segmented because of the arbitrariness of pages, basically a physical book, into 242 choruses. So my main thesis as regards Mexico City Blues was that the poem is non-dualistic insofar as it tries to enact both motion and immobility. So the narrator or the singer, you could say, singing the poem or blowing, so the jazzman blowing on the poem, is doing his best to keep the poem moving forward, but at the same time he also wishes to stop its motion, to make it immobile. And this theme courses throughout the entire poem and is most brilliantly exemplified by the 11th chorus, which you have on screen, with Brown wrote a book called The White and Black, Narcotic City, switching on, anger falls, musician stops brooding on bandstand. So it's a perfect example of the non-dualistic mindset pervading Mexico City Blues because it so explicitly references it. So the intertwining of countries is obviously mentioned in the second line, so the white and the black, which also happens to be well, the purported one of the purported novels of sorry, so it's supposed to be one of Stendhal's lesser known novels. But the way the chorus truly enacts its own set of countries, which say motion and immobility, can be witnessed actually in the blank that follows the fifth line. So we have anger falls, which has to be understood. So first of all, as a cascade, so a iconographic cue. So it's either it must be a cascade, a waterfall, and the void becomes movement. It has become motion. When we first read the poem, that's the first interpretation we have. And once, so we drop our eyes to the bottom of the page, the blank changes in meaning. The musician, it's said, has stopped and is brooding. The blank enacts a lack of motion. The poet has given up and brood, is immobile. So we have a void that can thus be interpreted as both motion, so waterfall, and or the failure to keep moving, to keep singing the poem. So this chorus really is excellent because it visually shows how contraries can be intertwined within the same space. This rope recurs throughout the entire poem, with Kerouac adapting it to topics such as birth, rebirth, or even the poet's own motivation. So an eco-poetical perspective on Mexico City Blues would be that it transcends contradictions by playing into them and performing them as the two sides of one single coin. Now, if we take a look take a look at Visions of Cody. The enmeshing of contraries takes a slightly different form. So Visions of Cody, if one has to be honest, isn't exactly a page turner. So it's a book full of nonsense, lacking in apparent structure, with too many characters and even more obscure references to the culture of the time. However, it is stylistically brilliant. It is unnervingly funny, and most importantly, it is written with such precision that you would think you were sitting next to Kerouac when he was taking note in his breast pocket notebooks. So really a brilliant book, even though not exactly a page turner. So from a purely descriptive point of view, the narrative is divided into 5 sections. The first one, the Manhattan sketches, then Cody's narrative, the tape, the imitation of the tape, and Joan Rorschach's In the Fog. The way the narrative intertwines contraries is actually by creating a dialogue between those parts, by making them interact and comment on one another. When what they are commenting upon is one of the major battles that rages in Kerouac's writings, namely the fight between his Buddhist ideals, which I'm going to come to in a minute, and the objectives he writes about in the Essentials of Spontaneous Prose. According to his Buddhism-inspired perspective, poetry and prose should aim at a sense of synchronicity, of all-inclusiveness and panoramic view. The text should be the perfect representation of everything that happens everywhere at every single moment. And then we have the spontaneous prose ideals, which favor aspects such as spontaneity or the exact translation of what the eye can contemplate at a given moment. And these two categories, categories of objectives clash in the narrative. But Kerouac's genius is to use that friction between those two categories of objectives and those contradictions to create a dialogue and a feedback loop between the sections of the book, which all take a different approach to acting out those objectives. For example, in the Manhattan sketches, the prose is faithful to the objectives of spontaneous prose, but fails to provide the reader with any sense of synchronicity, of all-inclusiveness. Whereas in the next section, Cody's narrative, Kerouac becomes conscious of the shortcomings of his first section and modifies his purely spontaneous technique to integrate the use of memory into the compositional process. The third section, the tape, is probably the most bizarre of them all, since it consists of an unaltered transcript of conversation Kerouac had with friends, so including Neil Cassidy, over a period of 5 days, I think. And that section does create a sense of synchronicity. So it's starting to get closer to the Buddhist ideals than the spontaneous prose ones. And in some sense, you can't get more spontaneous than by having this transcript of a real life conversation. But the problem with that third section is that there is no common narrator. And so the different perspectives cannot merge, and we have a failure at the end of that section. The fourth section first tried to remedy that problem, but falls into the opposite trap. And that section is also the moment when Kerouac seems to have a bit of breakdown. The prose was already incongruous, but he basically gives up going into drawings and plays on the space available on page. So it doesn't look like a book anymore. At some point, you could say it's just or maybe an art book. It also becomes a poem instead of keeping on with prose, and meaning completely deserts the composition. And finally, we have Joan Rorschach's In Fog. It narrates for the first 20 pages how the actress Joan Crawford ran upstairs in a movie, I think it was Sudden Fear. And so that sequence lasts for maybe 3 or 4 seconds, and Kerouac manages to make it span 20 pages. And it's arguably that section the most pleasant to read, but it's also the most impressive at a metafictional level, because it integrates the perceptual and representational challenges faced by the writer in Visions of Cody. And so it talks about itself, and the feedback loop really takes form in that section as well. And the prose of that final section is opposed to the one we find in the first one, the Manhattan sketches. It fulfills Buddhist ideals, but not completely, but cannot. It really the achievement really is at the cost of the spontaneous prose ideals. And in the end, so I'm going to finish with that. It's important to know that Visions of Cody never quite manages to merge its contradicting objectives. No section of the novel is perfect, and the dialogue never really ends. But more important even is the fact that it doesn't really matter that the novel is a failure. The novel accepts its failure and transcends it by making it into the content, the topic of the narrative. And so with this endearing thought, which is the hope that our mistakes and errors to may also be integrated into something better, I'm going to thank you for your attention and leave the floor to whom it belongs. Thank you.
Okay, Jeremy, thank you very much for your presentation, which again is just a very condensed version of the very detailed analysis you wrote, because of course this notion of feedback loops, this notion of how indeed the processes of chaos and dissipation, you know, how, I mean, all these physical concepts observable in nature actually, you know, transfer to the prose and help to understand what Kerouac is doing as a reading grid. Of course, that is something that cannot just be explained in, you know, just a few minutes. Right. I will open the floor to questions in a moment. And Chad, I hope you will help me to sort of manage the chat section if the questions come that way. The only thing that I will perhaps say, just to sort of, you know, round off the presentations before questions, is that what we have is indeed, well, 3 very different papers, yet 3 papers showing us that in fact, it is important to remember about, I mean, the Beats believe in the power of art to transform perception, because the transformative power of art and the way in which the poet can and poiesis can transform perception, that is one of the links making actually your 3 different avenues of research cohere. And indeed, it shows us, well, that, you know, something that was stated very early in beat research, because when the early discussions of beat spirituality, well, insist indeed, yes, on this, you know, poet as shaman equation, on, well, the, you know, the belief in art as a transformative tool for perception. And, you know, people perhaps, I mean, forget about these early studies and think that, I mean, that area is a closed topic, is a closed subject, when in fact what you show is that it's important not to leave that credo aside of the transformative power of art on perception as a main beat hallmark, but also that that hallmark is anything but exhausted when it comes to understanding its dynamics, which is why we had entitled the panel, you know, spiraling back and forth, because spiraling, okay, if I can just add, you know, personal note there, is linked to the fern structure in nature, and particularly in new, you know, in the Aboriginal eco-spirituality of, you know, the Maoris in New Zealand. And again, it is a structure found in nature that, you know, allows you to move back and forth between, you know, past, present, and future without dualistic structures. But what you show is that we need to tap into the early, you know, spiritual investigations, the early investigations of spirituality, of beat spirituality, and not forget about them. But we need to propel them forward through different reading grids, and that actually we are still dealing with a fairly open cartography of beat spirituality, because in fact, for so many years, we've used, I mean, very conventional concept, very conventional lenses. And what you 3 show is that in order to understand this beat transformation of consciousness at work through poiesis in texts, we need to indeed develop new reading grids for which there is ample room. I've spoken more than enough. Time now to, you know, allow the participants to ask you questions, to react to, you know, so fire away, please. I mean, again, Chad, if you can perhaps help me sort of, you know, sort of keep track of the order in which the questions or comments might come.
We can simply use the raise hand function, and like Michael J. Prince has done, and then we'll all see. So Michael's got a question. Yeah.
First of all, congratulations. This really was a fascinatingly well-woven panel. But my only question or comment concretely is to Jeremy. First of all, congratulations on taking on Visions of Cody. That's a hero's job. I was wondering if in your copious free time, you might want to turn the same paradigm set onto Big Sur, and in particular, the poem that closes that volume, The Sea. I think that you will have a lot of fun.
So actually, this is something that I was also interested in Visions of Cody, because Kerouac's relationship to the sea is, I think, a very complex one, and I'm not familiar with the entire his entire works, but the sea is also something, a theme, a topic that recurs in Mexico City Blues, and which I wanted to analyze and apply this reading grid to, but maybe with a slight twist on it. So I wanted to there's a concept which was more adapted, so which would have allowed me to use. It's the opposite of laminar flow. Does anyone know what the opposite of laminar flow is? I can't remember.
It may be fluvial, if we're talking geology anyway.
It's really a term in physics, and I can't recall. But so I thought so. I already thought about applying that to the topic of the sea, and really going into the water dynamics that are in his works, because I haven't gone into those considerations yet, especially not for the dissertation, but that would be interesting. And I'm not familiar with Big Sur, but I know Kerouac's first novel actually was The Sea, My Brother, something like that. So it's really something that would need to be looked into. So I think it could be applied to it, because the reading grid is quite flexible, and by way of looking for contradictions, it can well overcome some of the problems that would be problems if they were contemplated, looked at from a more classical, more reasonable point of view, maybe. So yeah, definitely something that would be interesting to see. Not sure I answered the question, but
anyone else would like to comment, would like to actually, interact with any of the participants? No questions at all?
I believe that two people are raising their hands, if I'm not mistaken.
I'm sorry, I can't see them. I'm sorry. I mean, who is raising their hands? Help me, Sarah. Okay, all right. Okay, I'm sorry, Matthew, because, okay, I look for the electronic hand, which shows to you what the virtual universe has done to me over the past 18 months. So a normal human hand, I mean, I'm looking for this yellow thing, this yellow icon. Sorry, Matthew, fire away, please.
Right. I just have a very simple question. First of all, I want to say that all three presentations I thought were fantastic and fascinating. Just a quick question for Anikó. I was just wondering, what was the result of the LSD trial in 1957 that you referred to for Juhász? What was the verdict or the result of the trial in the end?
Anikó, you have to unmute.
Anikó, you need to unmute your mic.
Sorry. So are you referring to the poem in prose that Juhász wrote about the experiment?
Yes.
I will have to open my thesis in order to show you a few excerpts. In the meantime, I can say that, but it's not very known, it's very much known outside Hungary, is that clinical drug trials also took place behind the Iron Curtain, but not publicly. Behind closed doors, we had a smaller version of what was going on in the United States. In spite of the fact that psychedelic culture couldn't really take roots because of the communist dictatorship, we had an anti-drugs propaganda way earlier than you did in the United States. Juhász is let me diethyl experiment. So Juhász did have a knowledge of Aldous Huxley's journals and Henry Michaud's, and he was very curious about the effects of hallucinogens. I'm going to share my screen now. He says, I hope to enter to that world of chaos, that inner and almost inaccessible structural billowing of existence. Critics say that Juhász used a very conventional language, sort of putting that, in a way, he put on a medical mask in which, through which he analyzed this experience. However, the symbol, the list of symbols that you can see in these paragraphs reoccur in his other poems, which suggests that the experience did have a deep impact on Juhász. As you can see it here, I don't want to take up too much time, but if you can just read this paragraph, there is what is similar to, for instance, Ginsberg's drug poems is that is the self-awareness that interfered. You can see the parts between brackets that kept interrupting these visions, which made it difficult to render them on the paper. However, for instance, the excerpts that I showed you from Thursday, Day of Superstition, seemed like drug-induced visions. And the poem that he wrote about Dylan Thomas, who was also one of Ginsberg's main inspirations. I can give you, I don't want to take up too much time, but you know, beneath the fire web of London streets before Christmas, like the last pre-conscious vision of the drug trials, a chain of golden horn painted glowing giant angels, a multitude of angels in the street place. And this poem about Dylan Thomas was the one that followed the Ethereal experience in the volume of poems in prose that in which the Ethereal experiment was published. So the experiment did have a lasting impact, but it couldn't be expressed in the same way as in the United States.
Right, right. Thank you very much.
Did I answer your question?
Yeah, yeah, it's fascinating because I always think of Ken Kesey in 1964, and this is many years before that happened. So it was fascinating. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Okay, Sarah said that someone else had raised their hand and that I saw nothing, basically. So who is the other person whom I have so brazenly ignored? I mean, so who was the other person, Sarah? Can you remind me?
It's Chad Weidner. I don't know if I butchered your name or not.
Yes, you did. That's fine. I'm used to it. So one thing I just wanted to say is all three were really, really interesting. And what I find really good about your approach is that you all have got really strong methods. I find that often graduate students will simply try to apply theory, and you've gone beyond that by trying to develop kind of an interesting or different approach, which of course speaks to your tutelage from Franca clearly. I do have a question for Sarah. I found that really, really fascinating, your paper, looking at Wordsworth and the Prima. But one thing that I didn't really see you address, and I wonder if you thought about this, is some of de Prima's work is really quite radical. I mean, I'm thinking about Revolutionary Letters, and she says, kill the CEO of Shell and blow up factories. And I mean, really eco-terrorist stuff that if you would say today, if you are not white, you would definitely be arrested. So when I think of Wordsworth, I think of like, okay, an American version of Romanticism, right? When I think of the Prima, I think of something a little bit less pastoral, a little bit more activist. I wonder if you thought about those differences at all. That's my question.
Yes. It's, because of time constraint, there's a lot I had to leave aside. And part of that was the differences between the two of them. There are striking differences that need to be mentioned, and they are mentioned in my thesis. And, this can count as one of them. De Prima is definitely more of a revolutionary than Wordsworth. And it's not something that I'm going to contradict. But in my thesis, I also talk about Revolutionary Letter, because some Revolutionary Letters are included in pieces of the song. So I got to explore them as well. And the way I've approached it in my thesis is through the notion of utopia and dystopia. And although Wordsworth goes on to move beyond that, the same way de Prima does, actually. She also, nuances her earlier and more revolutionary inclinations. But Wordsworth also, in his younger years, and in connection to the French Revolution, was very much a revolutionary. And he does include and talk about these young fervors in the prelude. And the way that I've connected it in my thesis, again, as I said, is through the notion of utopia and dystopia, and how by representing those alternate societies, both of them, again, through the imagination, propose a model, perhaps not to follow, because actually both of them remain really vague when it comes to what type of society they wish to create. And that's really important, because it really gives the reader freedom to make their own model. And so again, both Wordsworth and Prima actually do that. And yeah, connecting it to the imagination is really interesting in that sense, because I saw it as a way for the poets to influence their environment, again, through the imagination, because of the definition I give of nature, it needs to come from the imagination. And so through these utopian and dystopian representation of society, and that stem from their revolutionary inclinations, they're able to craft a reality through art and through poetry, and to present it to others, while at the same time leaving the door open for others to shape this very image that they create. And so again, I will not say that Wordsworth is as much of a revolutionary as Prima, because that's not the case. But the both of them do partake in this utopian and dystopian creation and use of the imagination. And politics is definitely an important factor in this. And I do talk about it in my thesis, but again, I had to leave that aside, unfortunately. But yeah,
sure. Yeah, it's clear. It's clear. Thank you.
Do we have time for a last question if anybody wishes to,
I have an addendum if no one else wants to talk. I have an addendum to the first question.
Yes. Okay.
So, okay. I'm going to start in. So so it was called Turbulent Flow, and I'm going to do a screen share to explain what it seemed so relevant to the study of so relevant in the case of Kerouac. So here we have the basic characteristics of turbulent flow, and you have irregularity, diffusivity, and dissipation, the last one. And if you take a quick read, anyone who's familiar with the essentials of spontaneous prose, I think, is going to find the pattern there, and to see why it would be maybe easier to apply his writings to reading grit inspired by turbulent flow than solely by dissipative structures, although the two could be joined in the process, I think. So just a quick addendum there. There we go.
Okay, thank you very much, Jeremy. And I love your addendum, because I think actually in a nutshell, it also gives me, the participants here an idea of the kind of, domain you've been excavating, because when you just see basically, indeed, well, the kind of concepts and the kind of, modeling of the geophysical universe that, you use. I mean, I think again, in a nutshell, just in an image and a couple of paragraphs there, you nicely reinforce indeed the eco-poetic dimension of your paper, showing indeed how well it is indeed modelings of natural forces here that can help us to understand beat aesthetics. So we are now reaching the end of our session, I believe, because it is 4:33, if I'm not mistaken. So I am correct, Chad, that, I mean, our time is up. I'm not imagining this. Right, of course, there are still other possibilities for participants to interact and talk to each other, virtually speaking, in the virtual chat room that parallels the main session, so throughout the conference. So there are still other opportunities for you to touch base. And yes, Chad?
Yeah, I just wanted to say, so what we can do now is you don't necessarily need to log out of the conference at all. You can just turn off your mic and your camera, and we will sort it out and arrange things back to where you need to be, so it's easier and quicker at 5 o'clock.
Okay, thanks. And before we actually switch off everything, I just wanted to say last time a big thank you to our three presenters, and to for sharing, I mean, these very, very interesting perspectives. And I also wanted to thank the EBSN as an association also for giving these young, promising scholars a floor, and encouraging them thereby further into their research. And I also wanted to thank the audience, actually, the people who took time out to tune in, to listen, who asked me these interesting questions as well. So thank you to the presenters, thank you to the audience for being there. And I think this concludes a panel that indeed foreshadows perhaps all the great things to come in the conference as a whole. So thank you to all of you, and we'll see each other again then at 5 p.m. And in the meantime, take care, everybody. Bye-bye for now. Bye-bye.